are these useful? Are these taking us through our actions to the places that we want to go? Because, outside of like physical laws in nature, there's a lot of the things that we say aren't like absolutely verifiably true. They just become useful beliefs. And there's a distinction there between recognizing if the results we have in our life are the ones that we want, then we need to re-examine the beliefs that are driving those actions.
Welcome to the Masterful Man podcast. I'm your host, Sven Masterson, coach, mentor, author, and fellow traveler on the path to mastery. Every man reaches a point where he knows he can't keep living the way he has been. The question is, what comes next? Here, you'll hear from men who've made the shift, men who've gone from stuck to unstuck, unshakable, and unstoppable. If you're ready to start moving forward, you're in the right place. In today's episode, I'm talking with Mike, a longtime friend, father of 5, and a man who spent years silently unraveling under the weight of a life that looked successful from the outside, but felt hollow on the inside. After 27 years of marriage, Mike found himself divorced, exhausted, and questioning everything. But instead of staying stuck in blame and bitterness, he started doing something most men never do. He started working on himself. This conversation is a raw, honest look at what really causes marriages to fall apart, why our neediness quietly destroys intimacy, and how self-reliance and brotherhood helped Mike rebuild a life he now calls peaceful, joyful, and whole. If you're struggling with resentment, loneliness, or the feeling that nothing you ever do is enough, this one's for you. All right, welcome, Mike. Thank you for joining the Masterful Man podcast today. Glad you could make it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
This is going to be a little bit weird for me because unlike many of our guests, I've known you for close to 30 years. And so it's interesting. Maybe it'd actually be really neat to interview somebody you've known closely for 30 years. And maybe I'll see a side of you I didn't know. Who knows? So, if you're familiar with the show, I like to start out having every man tell a little bit of demographics about him, approximate age, range. You can get as detailed as you're comfortable with, realizing this is public, general area that you live in, what you do vocationally, marital status, children.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Mike. I'm 53. I live in central Pennsylvania. Lived here most of my life. I'm a father of 5. The youngest is 18 years old. I was married for 27 years. It was a 30-year relationship overall. And I've been officially divorced for about a year now.
Okay.
As far as what I do for work, I am a supply planner.
Okay. All right. So supply planning, that could tell me a little bit of something about your personality.
Mm-hmm.
As far as pretty organized, I've known you to be a pretty organized person. You like most men to know what's going on, where things are. You like to know how things work, right?
Yeah, my role requires me to be very detail oriented. And it's interesting that I need to turn it off after work because I spend a good portion of my work week projecting into the future, extrapolating what might happen considering these variables. And that's not a good way to manage my personal life and particularly relationships and outcomes.
Yeah, right.
We can't take a couple of data points and extrapolate what's going to happen on Friday.
And this is hard, isn't it? I mean, nobody tells you this when you enter a relationship like marriage. And it's hard, isn't it? Because we're rewarded for this. Actually, even in a lot of family scenarios, I remember the early years of our friendship were spent doing a lot of DIY projects together, weren't we? Lots of renovations, things that really require seeing the end from the beginning. And so, we can unpack that a little bit about how that's a real gift and skill for us as men but it can get us into a bit of trouble relationship wise. So yeah, let's jump into that. Setting the stage a little bit. What I like to ask men is if we could rewind the clock and we were meeting you 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you get to pick where you want to start the story. What would you have told us about yourself? How would you describe yourself? And we realize that you're telling us that from today's perspective, right? So like we think our memory is fixed. But the reality, when you remember 5 years ago, you're remembering it with like the maturity and wisdom of today, or lack of it, depending on your scenario. And so it's probably not going to be exactly how you saw yourself. But how do you remember seeing yourself 5 or 10 years ago? What was going on in life? What was life like?
I'd say 5 to 10 years ago, life was kind of more of the same. A lot of work, a lot of like do it yourself work around the house. My memory of it is I started to become like more and more disenchanted with life, more and more miserable, less confident about my path, the path that I was on. And I feel like I exuded that to the people around me, to my wife, to my family, and probably the other people in my life. I think I was able to turn it off to a degree, but I was very unhappy with the trajectory of my life.
Yeah.
It was more of a like, is this it?
Is it? You mean like, is this all there is?
Yeah, is this all there is? Yeah.
Yeah. Super common question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very necessary question, but this does seem to be something we start asking ourselves as men. Now, I just want to point out or just clarify, did you feel this way in your work?
Not 10 years ago, because at that point I had made a big career change for me, and I would have been about 2 years into it, and it was a much better situation for me. It was a much better environment, and I really enjoyed the team that I work with. So
Yeah.
going to work was a good getaway for me, from my personal life.
Okay. Now, I asked that a little bit on purpose because I noticed talking to hundreds of men a year that there's a little bit of a trend or some correlation. It makes it hard for us to see when we're in this spot because work seems like it's going pretty well, or maybe whatever our main focus is. Mm-hmm. And this creates some contrast that is kind of hard for us to feel our way through because like, you're like, well, I don't know what's wrong. I feel okay in this way. And sometimes men are very successful in their other parts of life, maybe in their career, maybe in their other pursuits. For example, I talk to a lot of fit people and they might be running marathons and endurance races and they might just be killing it or feeling like they're killing it in every way. But then they have this kind of emptiness that you're describing. What were the kind of struggles that this was leading to for you in your life at the time? Like what were the hardest parts of just your regular existence?
Yeah, when you were describing what you just said just now, I was thinking I didn't know how to micro transition very well. I didn't even know the concept. I've never heard of it, but I was enjoying my work life, and then I would leave work, and I would often get nervous that now it was time to go home and interact with my spouse. I think a lot of this work is self-awareness. I didn't have any awareness around the fact that I felt nervous about that, a little bit anxious, not confident about it. Looking back on it, I might have spent some time just transitioning from work to home to the gym to running, like all the little transitions that happen throughout our days.
And you called those micro transitions?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them that happen throughout the day.
Yeah.
Kind of preparing your mindset to go into the next thing. Talking on this podcast with you is a different mindset than preparing, to go lift heavy weights at the gym.
Yeah, I understand. It's interesting you brought this subject up because it's an area I've also become cognizant, not just in myself, but in my wife. And just talking with people, I think humans in general experience some level of stress. Now, as a fellow Whoop user, we both have plus we're both Whoop geeks. We have this ability to look at our Whoop data and say, and so you can start to notice these transitions, the stress of them by looking at your data, which is really interesting. I've noticed, of course, mine's gotten better as I've done this kind of internal work. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, super stressful. And I think a lot of that is physiological and biological. I mean, we have brains that are always trying to keep us
Yeah.
safe,
Yeah.
right? And so if you think about to a brain, any kind of transition is probably a little bit stressful.
Interesting on that note with the stress monitor on the Whoop. Sometimes I feel like I'm in a very stressful situation, and then I make a mental note to go look at the stress monitor, and I'm like, I was flatlined throughout that whole thing. So
Yeah.
throughout my life, I've learned that should be a very stressful situation for me. But now, after doing some of this work, it's not a stressful situation for me. But I think
Yeah.
that it should be.
Yeah. That's not uncommon. The whole reason we're big Whoop fans in the community is because it helps men validate that what we are saying and focusing on is physiologically provable, meaning if you happen to wear one and you start out and you see, man, I'm all over the place, and then you notice, actually, as I do this work, I'm going through stressful moments. I'm aware of them, but my nervous system stays calm. Um, it's a great way to validate that these things we do and talk about seem to really be effective. So
Because we know
anyway,
we're okay. We
yeah,
have
and
a
that's
we have a
another big
strong sense of our value, worth, and significance. So we know that these things out here, they're not actually hurting
right.
us.
And interestingly, the Whoop can also, and I happen to like Whoop. I think having any kind of monitor like this is helpful, but they can also play a role in helping you to look at something that gives you biofeedback to help you understand you're okay.
Hmm.
Right. This is one of my favorite things about fitness tech. Not that I'm not a huge fitness tech guy, but I find that's really meaningful. There's a personal development angle to using Whoop that I don't think Whoop even talks about. I've talked to them a little bit or shared a little bit about that with them. But anyway, yeah, it could be really useful to think about using a fitness tracker to help you to give you a feedback mechanism to help with these micro transitions. Same with breath work. Okay, so in hindsight, in the past, yeah, you didn't have this Whoop telling you about your transitions. And so,
I had no self-awareness. I only knew how to live in the ego or the brain. I only knew that I was uncomfortable and that something outside of me was doing it to me. Was
so
make,
what were the
making me
symptoms?
uncomfortable.
Looking back, how did you feel? What was going on in just like the dynamics of your life? Like, what did it look like to go through these transitions? If you talked about them from today's vantage point.
Yeah, but breaking life out into segments, I was still doing I was doing a lot of trail running then. I was staying on task with my home projects. I was excelling in the workplace, but I felt like I felt like there was a storm cloud like constantly over my head. I was like, I'm doing like all of these things very well. I feel like I'm a good provider at home. I'm a good husband. I'm a good father. But I was unhappy. Or just a general sense of unhappiness.
Did you feel like that was hard to admit, or like you couldn't admit it?
Hmm.
Say
Yeah,
more about that.
it was hard to admit to myself. And as a man, I think that I learned growing up that maybe it's not okay to be vulnerable with my feelings. I didn't I hadn't really been exposed to the concept of brotherhood and talking about like my innermost feelings, the things that I'm most vulnerable about, talking about those with trusted friends.
Yeah,
So I kind of kept it inside. I didn't do any journaling then, certainly no breath work. There wasn't an outlet for any of these ways that I was feeling.
yeah. It is challenging, isn't it? I mean, because I think most of us as men tend to have this like ridiculous fear of looking weak. So that doesn't help. But also, we kind of live in a world where people like invite you to be vulnerable, share your feelings. And if you do, you get kicked in the balls for it generally in some way. And then you're like, well, I'm not doing that again. Everybody told me that was a good idea, but look, there was some sort of hell to pay for it. And maybe that's our understanding of trying to tell a woman you're vulnerable inside. But oftentimes it's telling men too, because if you get a lot of men together most often and you start talking about your insides, there's usually ends up being some sort of, for lack of a nicer way to say it, a dick measuring contest where men are like, well, I don't struggle with that. Right. Because it becomes an opportunity for someone to feel elevated. by feeling bigger than everybody or better. So we can get trapped, is what I'm saying, right?
I think you described it well there. I was trapped behind a fear of looking weak.
Yeah. Did you have more to say about that?
No, I was just summarizing like that. My description before with like that was a fear of looking weak. And so I wouldn't be
Okay.
vulnerable with those feelings. Yeah.
Were there any warning signs that you would say were present that you did, even if you didn't see them then, but you saw now?
Such as,
Yeah, that's up to you. That's what I'm looking for.
I don't think so. I don't know that I had enough. I didn't have enough self awareness then to recognize warning signs.
Can you look back from now and say, oh, that was a warning sign? Or do you find, let me ask you this way. Do you ever find yourself talking to another man and seeing him almost like from a third person point of view, like, well, he's about to step into this. And you can say that because you recognize, you kind of see your own story in his life. Like, do you ever find yourself saying that?
I do. Yeah. Yeah, so if I can work backwards. So some of the things that I value primarily are sleep, exercise, nutrition, my relationship with myself and relationship with others. But I feel like the foundation for all of that is sleep. And so when I'm talking to friends at work and they're talking to me about their struggles in life, but then I learn a little bit how they're living their life. You know, they're out until the wee hours, consuming a lot of alcohol, not really taking care of themselves in those fundamental ways. It's easy to get sidetracked, and with your relationship with yourself and your relationship with others, you're really sabotaging both of those things.
Yeah. So you did a bit of that?
Yeah, I did a lot of that. I think that the training was there and the a focus on nutrition was there, but there wasn't the same focus on sleep. I didn't know it at the time because it's the culture that I live in, the culture that I grew up in. But there was certainly some drinking and oftentimes like heavy drinking involved.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the paradoxes about at least the trail running community, isn't it? At least around here. And just for the listener, we live in the mecca of East Coast trail running, but it is kind of paradoxical in that this is a group dedicated to doing very fit things, but also like to live pretty hard when not running. It's a little bit hard to get your head around, but yeah, I remember, and I'm not saying this in any kind of way that tears you down, but yeah, I remember a time in your life where alcohol was it was more prominent. I would not have called you an alcoholic, but who knows? Maybe you were and I didn't know it. But
I wouldn't have called myself an alcoholic. I certainly wasn't a daily drinker. I was more of a weekend warrior.
yeah,
But it was just something that I learned to do as a teenager.
yeah,
Interestingly, a couple years ago, I noted that as a 16, 17, 18-year old, my brain developed this relationship between alcohol and physical intimacy with a woman because when I was growing up, the two went together. And then like throughout my 20s and into my 30s, like they were like a thing that always went together. And then
yeah,
as I approached the middle age, like they stopped being a thing together, which led to a lot of frustration for me and I think a lot of me pushing my ex-wife away from me.
Do you think that has to do with the time we grew up? Because as soon as you said that, I was like, well, this is the Motley Crue generation. I mean, like we grew up with a culture at the time or subculture that absolutely correlated sex and alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
which is so funny because realistically, the more you drink, like the more horrible your sex life's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was definitely peddled as like these two things go together, wasn't it?
Yeah, it certainly was.
You know, from these definitely 80s music did that. That was our
Like,
junior high and high school too, wasn't it? Like, do you remember that? Maybe it was just me and where I grew up, but did where was your school like that? I mean, everything was about like just drinking and girls, right?
yep, it
I
was all
don't.
about that.
Yeah, interesting. I don't think I've ever talked to somebody who's like verbalized that connection to intimacy and marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And so tell me more about how did that show up for you? Did that create dysfunction? Did that create conflict? What did that lead to?
It was probably 2 years ago-ish, I'd put alcohol consumption behind me. I'm not ruling it out. I might still have an adult beverage, on a special occasion or something. But I realized how I was sabotaging my life by consuming it. And so I had generally put that habit behind me. And I remember I was hanging out with my ex-wife at the time, and I enjoyed a beverage, and then I opened a second one, and I started to have that feeling, and I was like, I don't like doing this. Like I prefer the natural state of my mind. And at the same time, I was like, I've really had an enjoyable day with my wife. There's been a lot of connection. There's been a lot of playfulness. It was just like an easygoing, nice day. And now I'm feeling a different way about her, like a little bit angry and frustrated with her. And then just in that moment, I just look back through, the past 20 years or whatever. And I was just thankful for the self-awareness in that moment about how alcohol, it can change my disposition.
Yeah.
It sucked away the playfulness.
I think for some people, at least, maybe everybody, I don't know. It seems like alcohol is a conscious inhibitor. It seems like whatever's in your subconscious floats to the top. And, if you're a person who's done a lot of inner work and you have a lot of healing, it doesn't seem to be a big deal because who you are, even if you're intoxicated, it seems to be generally okay. But it seems like when somebody gets intoxicated, if they're carrying around a lot of like whatever their shadows are, seem to be prominent, right? So if you're like a brooding, angry, that'll be like multiplied while intoxicated, right? Uh, if you're really sorrowful, we all kind of know how people like that get.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
I'd be interested to know the percentage of poor experiences that I had with my ex-wife while we were both consuming alcohol. It was a great number, a very high percentage that led to a lot of misperceptions between the two of us.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They say I think that alcohol is something like same with poor sleep. Interestingly, they both have a very
Mm-hmm.
similar cognitive effect. It's at least like a 40% tax on your cognition. I mean, imagine just walking around 40%, like with a 40% failure rate, right? And then try to have something like marriage go well with 40% tax on your thinking.
Yeah, well, take that 40% and then take, as we get older, we're completely sabotaging the next day, and probably it takes our recovery even into the second day after a lot of drinking on a Saturday night. And in between that, the rift between you and your spouse, or it's just growing wider. No one knows how to manage that. There's no self-awareness. There's both parties are blaming the other in their mind for how they're
Yeah,
feeling.
a lot of collateral damage in a system like that. And if
Hmm.
you think a week being 7 days, you're talking about at least a third to half of the week from maybe just one day of drinking. Like it's having collateral impact on your relationship for at least a third to half of the week. And that's if you have the skills to repair conflict. But more often than not, I think what a lot of people do is they get things to back to being just like moderately okay by Friday. And then they drink again, right? And so you're living in this kind of this system of self-sabotage that just keeps recurring over and over and over again and is sabotaging a relationship too. But why are you doing it in the first place?
Yeah, probably because I didn't know any better. It's what we do in our culture. It's certainly what a lot of people do around where I live. And I never thought about it. Up until 5 to 10 years ago, I never thought about my beliefs. I never thought to question my beliefs. I never sat back and said, why do I do this to myself every week? By the time Friday rolls around, I'm sort of recovered and then, spend Friday and Saturday night doing that again. Never thought about it.
Yeah, I
Yep.
think that's true for a lot of people. So you've talked about a number of times about an ex-wife, and so it sounds like some things went sideways, which I'd like to get into a little bit with you to the degree you're willing to talk about that. But I'm also just wondering about this feeling you mentioned a little while ago about just not being happy, kind of asking, is this all there is?
Hmm.
What did you try? Talk about, before we get into some of how things went sideways, how did you start to try to quote unquote fix this? or address these feelings? Did you address them? What was your response to them those years back?
Yeah, I remember pretty clearly before my ex-wife originally filed for divorce in the summer of 2019. I should have been feeling great about life. I had finished I had just finished two projects, finished remodeling two rooms in my home. Work was going well. Like, a lot of things in my life were going well. But at the same time, I remember very clearly being very miserable. I had a lot of desperate thoughts, and I think that I didn't enjoy my own company, and I was looking for something outside of me to save me and make me feel better.
Okay.
So
What did that
there,
practically look like? Like what? What kind of stuff were you looking to?
I was looking at my wife. I was putting that burden on her. I think too. I would say that I was blaming my relationship for my unhappiness
Okay.
rather than taking the ownership of how I was feeling. Rather than accepting the ownership, I was pointing fingers outside of me.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So some blame.
Mhm.
Were you trying to get relationship to change? I mean, usually if we're blaming our relationship, we're simultaneously trying to tweak it because that's where you believe the answers are. You generally, especially if you're a planner and a person who manages, you start looking for like, okay, what are the levers and dials I need to change here to get my relationship to do what I want?
I don't know. Maybe I thought of them as levers at the time, but I might be wrong. I might be, misremembering how it played out, but I remember a lot of pouting on my part, a lot of stonewalling. I was certainly not a warm human being to be around, not kind, not gentle. If I thought that they were levers, I was very wrong.
Yeah, I don't think most people actually know that they're levers. I mean, I say that as a person. Like today, we would recognize that oftentimes those are strategies we're doing to manipulate, even if it's subconscious. I'll use pouting, for example, that broody thing. It's my understanding and perspective that we pick up those habits in childhood, like something upsets us and we go pout and somebody recognizes, oh, what's wrong, Mike, right? Or Sven. And so then your little brain as a kid learns that like, hey, when I do these things, people respond. Like it gets their attention. They come and give me attention, and I feel seen and I feel appreciated. And we don't oftentimes learn like new mature ways to express how we're feeling and to lead ourselves, right? So then we just do that. As 30, 35, 40, 45-year old adults, we're pouting like small boys. And I'm not saying that in a judgmental way. I'm saying that with compassion because I've done the very same thing myself, not realizing just how unattractive that is to the people in our life.
Yeah, you don't realize it. No.
So some people are pouty and some people are angry, like the angry kind of vicious response. Did you have any of that, or did you just kind of err more on the pouty, mopey, broody kind of
Yeah,
spectrum?
yeah, pouty, moody. That was my go-to.
Yeah. Which interestingly is still mean. It's like
That's
it's
me.
the nice
Sure.
guy way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to look back on that with a little bit of grace towards myself and in my memory, or if I tell my story or parts of my story. I want to say that I was always like that, but I don't think that was true. Like, I think for the most part, I was probably myself. I certainly had some moments where that was my strategy: stonewalling, being cold, being pouty, brooding, being angry.
Can I
And
share a
yeah, sure.
perspective about that?
Yeah.
Finish your thought. It sounded like you were done. I apologize.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think just as more time has elapsed in my mind and the story that I tell myself, I want to paint myself as a less bad human being. I think sometimes I don't give myself enough credit for generally being a solid person through those years.
Yeah, I appreciate that you said that. I think it's really important. And I believe that the way we tell these stories will reinforce that. I don't see any of these things as judgeable. What we're ultimately talking about is navigating
you might know, I like to call it adolescence. All humans go through transformation and growth. Like nobody starts out just like this rock solid individual. We think we are, but we're all a work in progress and we're all maturing in our human life, right? And just like we have physiologically speaking, you have infancy, then you become a child, and then you're a child the whole time, but you're an infant, then you're a toddler, then you're I don't know what you call that next one. I don't know. Then you're a tween, and you're a teen and an adolescent, and then you're an adult. And I like to think about adolescence because you're not a child, but you're also not an adult.
Hmm.
And what I find is a lot of men who are alive today never learned how to stop being emotional children. And it's not because there's something wrong with them. Most men would say they just didn't get any instruction this way. And I don't look for blame in that. I think it's better to focus on the opportunity instead of focusing on how, because how it happened is kind of irrelevant, meaning like no matter how you got to the place where you didn't mature, you still need to mature, right? So I wouldn't critique one of my children for going through adolescence. And so I don't think it's appropriate to critique men for that either, meaning I don't think we need to shame men because their life's journey took them to a place where they just didn't get this kind of emotional maturing, right? Like from their story. I didn't get it either. You didn't get it. So, point being, I love that you're saying, hey, I want to look back on myself with some compassion and grace. I didn't know what I didn't know. And it's not like you woke up any single day and like, you know what, I think I'm going to be an asshole today, or I think I'm going to be mopey. You got up like almost every man I meet and said, I'm going to just do what feels like I'm supposed to do, which generally for most married husbands and fathers is like, I'm going to go be a provider, protector. I'm going to be civil, right? So we don't know there's some more. Now, getting back to this, you said I wasn't always this way. I just wanted to say earlier, and this is a little bit for the listener too. It seems like from where I'm standing, talking to guys all the time, that most men are pretty good until they become fathers. And it's because most women are actually not really pushing for a deeper quality of a relationship early on. And then when a woman becomes a mother and realizes what it feels like for somebody to need you perpetually all the time, I think then she notices, hey, wait a minute. The man in my life feels an awful lot like one of the children. And he's always had a person who's just giving him attention all the time, which is a lot like childhood. If you think about it, like maybe your mom just paid attention to you a lot as a kid and you get married and it's like, and I know this is gross, but this is oftentimes how it is. A wife or partner becomes a little bit of a surrogate mother figure. So if you haven't emotionally matured, you're getting an awful lot of what you got from mom, from a wife. And children blow all that up because she's too exhausted to to play that role. And so that's when a lot of women just like they kind of there's a natural like pulling away. It seems like when women have children, they're just, and I think it's actually really a good thing. But a lot of men get really pissy and jealous, and they start to feel like some new things after their children are. I don't know if that matches the timing of your story. I'm just sharing with you a common pattern about when men kind of slowly start to spiral oftentimes is after they become fathers because of this. But I don't know. How did that feel?
That feels about spot on.
Oh, yeah.
And I agree that I think we're here to talk about emotional maturity. Interestingly, I was at the barbershop a couple days ago and I was talking to my barber. He was telling me that he often feels like a therapist. Um, you know, People sit down for their half hour appointment or whatever. Um, and they just, they just let it go on him. They tell him about like everything that's going on in their life. And I was feeling very compassionate toward him because after 8 hours of listening to various people's stories, that would be such a huge energy drain on me. And then he has to sort of transition from being a barber and listening to men all day. Like he has to transition to going home and being a father and a husband. And we were talking a little bit about how the discord that can create, because he needs a little bit of space when he gets home. But his wife's been working from home. She works remotely. And so it's an interesting dynamic. What we came to was we believe there's a place out there to start presenting these concepts that we talk about to 20-year-olds, to 25-year-olds. I don't, in a short like reel, or just to start to get some exposure so that the next generation doesn't have to like repeat the same mistakes that we made. Because he and I were talking, like, we just grew up and we were just doing what our fathers were doing. We didn't ever thought about it. There was no self-awareness about it. And we just perpetuated the same mistakes.
Yeah, I've come to some similar conclusions, and I've run into, and I continue to run into, I do have young men reach out to me and to us as a community. And I'm always thrilled about it because it's tremendously self-aware for a young man in his 20s to say, I want to do things now to better position me emotional maturity wise, because most of us in our 20s had a here, hold my beer attitude about all this. And we looked at our fathers and older men like, with this kind of this ego and cockiness. And so that's also true today. Like a lot of men in their 20s are, you just think you know everything. Not everybody. Like I said, we have some men in our community that are in their 20s, and it's actually really encouraging. And, when I first got into this stuff of helping men, I was a little bit, I wasn't too hopeful about the future. And then I started talking to men in their 20s, and that all changed because they are, to be blunt, they're much deeper than a lot of us were in their 20s. And so I'm actually really encouraged by how open and how desiring for depth and vulnerability young men are. And I think we need to make sure we don't squander that.
Yeah.
But figuring out how to communicate, how to find those men and connect with them and speak to them about these things is something. But, a big part of our mission at Masterful is to help men experience transformation that are especially older men so that they wake up to their role in culture of passing these things on. Because that's what every man I talk to, and like in his feast to 60s, they all say the same thing. I didn't get this from my dad. They don't all think their dad was a bad guy, just that like the dad just didn't really help them with emotional maturity.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
could he? I don't think he could. I don't think our dads could generally do that.
It's interesting listening to this, like, as an outsider, perhaps. I mean, why bother with emotional maturity? What would be the point of getting the message sooner in our lives? What's the goal to all of this? What are we looking for?
Yeah. What do you think?
I think it's like, no matter what's going on outside of me, the events in my life, emotional maturity has a place that it's led me is just a continual sense of peace and calmness. And I'm able to pretty consistently keep it going, keep the traction, maintain my direction in that way. So I would say, like, if someone was like, well, who cares? Well, like, hold my beer, right?
Yeah.
Why bother with any of this? To me, it feels like a much better starting point every day to be at peace and to be calm.
Yeah. I would say to have an unshakable well-being.
Mm-hmm.
The same concept to me. It's not about relationships with women. It's about my relationship with myself.
Mm-hmm.
I can unequivocally say I have absolutely bulletproof self-worth. And it's because it doesn't come from anything outside of me. So like that's been to me the biggest gift in my life because it's allowed me to have self-acceptance, which I didn't have for the first 40 some odd years of my life. And that meant I was never really okay for very long. So to me, emotional maturity is coming to a place where you're your own best friend. And it didn't lead me obviously to isolation. I mean, we created a global men's community, right? But instead, it's actually made all of my relationships profoundly gratifying because I don't need something from you. So like, you and I spend a decent amount of time together and I could just enjoy you. I don't need to manipulate you. I don't need to try to get you to give me something. And it's, I mean, I don't know. I consider it a really valuable friendship and it's a treasure to me, but because it's just like a opportunity to be with somebody who it's cooperative without manipulation, without like I don't ever get home and be like, oh, I'm disappointed. Mike Mike didn't say such thing, and that translates into all my relationships because of that the core of having well being. Because I think emotional maturity, to kind of put it another way, maybe we can get into this a little bit, knowing that, and this pisses a lot of younger people or less mature people off, but knowing that no problem inside of me is addressed or fixed by something outside of me. And that is a tough truth to come to, but the most liberating truth to experience, right?
It is. Yeah.
Because you can always be okay. If nothing is ever caused outside of me, ultimately, then I don't ever need something to change to be okay. And I can't think of a more freedom giving truth than that, more liberating. Is that what you meant?
That's what I meant. Yeah. And I think a little corollary to that, or an example is, so in the dating world on the free agent market, I've been in a couple situations or several scenarios actually where I get a text that says, I miss you. And it's the middle of the workday. And I look at this message a little later on in the day and I'm like, well, I don't miss you. And I'm not going to, like, one of the things that I value the most is just being authentic, being honest, right? And so I'm not going to tell someone I miss them if I don't actually miss them. And so I try to like work around it a little bit. And then a couple more hours will pass and, well, don't you miss me? Well, now I definitely don't miss you. If you ask that, if you have to ask for it. But I think where I'm going with that is, when you have a sense that your self-worth is bulletproof, and when you're your own best friend, I don't find myself missing people. I miss my kids. I miss their presence when they're not here. Like, sometimes I immediately miss them after we've had like a lot of great fun together. But outside of the five of them, I don't like. I think this is it's a function of knowing your worth. You're not looking for someone out there to like fill some need in here.
Sometimes it could be the precision of language because, I mean, we all suffer with this, right? Like if you and I don't hang out for a while, and this is true for anybody with me, there's a fondness I have for people in my life, but it's not a need. It's just like, it's part of treasuring people in your life. Like, hey, I really enjoy being with you, and I haven't had that experience for a while, and I'm noticing. I'm
Yeah.
noticing, right? And I'm just saying it's a little bit of positive pushback. I would suspect that maybe some of the texts you're receiving are from that vantage point.
Mm-hmm.
And some are legitimately needy because a lot of people have actually cultivated their sense of worth from people needing them. And that doesn't feel good,
Mm-hmm.
right? But
Yeah.
that's what you just reported having had done in your past with your wife too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you send her a lot of texts in the past?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, the precision of language, and that would have been a strategy of mine, sending a text saying I miss you, and then feeling validated as a human being when she was like, oh, I really miss you too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this case, or in these examples, maybe that's not always a needy or an icky thing. Maybe someone just generally misses, or enjoys my presence, and they want a little bit more of that. So it's not necessarily needy or dependent,
Yeah.
but it,
It's
but it
hard to
might be.
it's hard to know, right? This is the thing. But I took your point to mean regardless that what you've lost is the illusion that neediness is true love, or that it's really actually even healthy.
Mhm. No, yeah, it isn't. It isn't healthy. The neediness.
And then if you've been a needy person and then suddenly other people are needy towards you, it's just very noticeable if you're not a needy person. Women notice it very well, way more than men. Yeah. Okay. So what else did you try back then? We talked a little bit about how the role alcohol played. Did you just white knuckle it? Were there books? Did you go to therapy, counseling? Like what kind of stuff were you employing to try to feel better about your life and relationships several years ago?
Yeah. I think one of the most pivotal moments of my life was several months after my ex-wife had filed for divorce. everything that I was trying. Not a lot of varied things, but more of the same, hanging out with friends, just like partaking in a lot of various numbing behaviors. I got to a point, it was a Saturday morning in October. I was very upset. I was despairing. By this time, I had my own place. I was living alone. I clearly had the thought that no one was going to save me, and that I had to figure out how to save myself, right? Or else I was going to just like end up laying in this bed the rest of my life. It wasn't linear from that point, but if I could chart the data, I would see that it's been a long obedience in the same direction since that point. That it's been an upward trajectory over time since the morning that I had that epiphany that no one was going to save me. I have to figure out how to save myself. Yeah. So that was the biggest turning point in my inner transformation.
Okay. So did something bring that about? Like, were there some forcing functions behind that were putting you in this place of needing a rescue?
Mhm. Yeah. So my at that time, like I seemed like divorce was imminent at the time. That wasn't going to change, and I had a lot of fear at however old I would have been then, 47, starting my life over, creating a new home, finding a new home, maybe a new community, creating a sense of home. What the holidays look like? When will I see my kids? How will this impact them? There's so many questions that go into that, and it can feel overwhelming. I don't know. It felt like there had been a bomb dropped on my life. Like everything that
That's why people call it the divorce bomb.
well, yeah, like I had done everything that I was supposed to do, right? I had been the first of my family to graduate from college. And I followed the like correct trajectory. I was the father and the husband that I thought that I was supposed to be. And yet, like in the end, like I had nothing. Well, it felt like I had nothing at the time, but I see it differently now. But
Yeah.
it led to quite a bit of yeah, those were some desperate moments for me for sure.
You even had the yard, if I remember correctly. You even had the yard with the picket fence. It wasn't a white picket fence, but didn't you have a picket fence in your white
Yeah,
home
we did.
or something?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It
so
wasn't
like,
white, but yeah.
yeah, you get my point. Yeah, you followed the script that we were taught was supposed to lead us to a happy life, and
I did. Yeah.
you tried to make your wife happy too. That was the other thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole happy wife, happy life. Yep. Yep.
Did that
That's
work out for you?
no, that didn't. It works the other way.
Yeah, that's paradoxical, isn't it?
It is.
So, yeah, maybe we could talk about that a little bit because this is one thing I believe a lot of young married men, husbands and fathers need to hear. They're often very resistant. It's often very misunderstood. But if you follow that script, you're going to end up in a painful place. So, yeah, talk a little bit about maybe your experience with a happy wife, happy life, how that showed up in your day to day living and what you've learned about it since.
So I would say I put everything in my life above myself. I was always depleted. I was putting my wife ahead of me, my children ahead of me, my work ahead of me. And I wasn't taking the time for some of the self-care things that we talked about earlier, a good night of sleep, the nutrition, like all the foundational things to our well-being. And so my strategy was upside down. I didn't realize at the time that I need to take care of myself first. I need to create a safe place for me. And then, the people in my life, they'll just be warmed by my presence. Yeah. So all of the gift giving, the striving, the producing, yeah, the happy wife, happy life. It just leads to depletion. It leads to a lot of pain.
It's really paradoxical too. I'm wondering if we can unpack this a little bit because I mean, men do this for a number of reasons. For
Mm-hmm.
one, we're taught that it's virtuous, but also men do it because good men, one of the things they fear the most, other than being seen as weak, is being called a controlling narcissistic asshole or selfish, right? And so a man will put himself all the way at the bottom to avoid being controlling, being selfish, being narcissistic. And then the irony of this is his wife will be extremely frustrated with him despite all this, and generally feel like because she feels horrible, he's a controlling, narcissistic asshole. It's like you end up getting the very thing you didn't want because you're so depleted that you do all of these, you're doing all these like covert manipulative things. You're not actually being honest about yourself because you're trying to keep the peace. You're walking on eggshells, and then that's your outcome. But it gets even worse because then we tell a guy like that, you have to focus on yourself. And he's like, there's no way I can do that. She already thinks I'm a narcissist. If I actually focus on self-care, doesn't that absolutely make me a narcissist? And so this is like the Gordian knot to untangle sometimes for us in life. But it's the paradox. You have to repair that core relationship with yourself in order to be meaningfully engaged with other people. Otherwise, you're not living in integrity and in strength. You're fundamentally living a reactive life. And you think, well, I'm doing everything she says she needs, and it doesn't work.
Hey, this is Sven. I hope you're enjoying today's episode of the Masterful Man podcast. We're taking a quick break, and in the meantime, I've got a question for you. Are you feeling stuck? Not just tired, but like something in you is quietly fading? Like the tools that used to work, grit, performance, logic, aren't cutting it anymore? If that hits home, I wrote something for you. It's called The First Steps Out of Stuck, a straight-talking guide for men ready to reclaim their power in life, love, and leadership. And you can grab it free right now at guides.masterful.men. Again, that's guides.masterful.men. Let this be the moment you stop waiting and start creating. Now let's get back to today's conversation.
Okay, so when I talk about this happy wife, happy life, it can be a little nuanced. And I think we should unpack this a little bit because just real brief primer for, I mean, you know this, Mike, but not everybody listening does, is we all have, I would say, like two halves of our ego. You have a side that's kind of collapsing and pouty and, for lack of a better word, really weak. And then you have a part of your ego that's explosive, angry, villainous. So let's put it that way. One part of your ego, you could say, is very victimhood oriented, and another is very villainhood oriented. And so, even though we're talking about happy wife, happy life, those two sides of your ego will see that very differently. And so some stories, I talk to plenty of men who they're more on the victimhood side. And other men are on the villainhood side. So like in my story, I could be victim-y at times, but I have my shadows, my ego is more oriented towards the jerk side, like the explosive side. Not in a hostile way towards my wife per se, but I just had a real pissy attitude towards her. I didn't actually walk around like kowtowing to her all the time, and she'd be the first one to say that. But interestingly, I still had this belief that if I keep things okay, I guess you could say, she would like I would get what I want. So maybe you could unpack that a little bit. I don't think, from my understanding of you, that you're like the collapsing, like weak, impish version. Now, let me give you a visual example to help. If you ever seen the movie Gladiator, Commodus is, he's the emperor's son, right? Like he's the villain in the story. And all villains, interestingly, are victims, but he's more of like the victimhood, the woe is me. And like, so in the scenes where he's talking to his sister, he's always kind of pouty and nobody likes me. That's oftentimes going to be like the nice guy persona, and one is not better than the other. Just to be clear, they're both unaddressed wounds. Um, but you don't tend to be the Commodus type of guy, right? It's not how I've known you anyway.
Mhm.
So yeah, what did it look like for you? Because maybe it wasn't the traditional like, oh, I'm trying to make my wife happy all the time.
Yeah. I thought that I was doing what was necessary to make her happy. I always felt like I was a good gift giver, like I said before, referenced. Felt like I was a good father and a husband. I don't know. I didn't have a sense that that was her view of me, and so I would often embrace the role of a villain. Um, if someone's
Which is like entitlement, like feeling entitled to things, and
yeah, for sure. And I felt very much like at times she saw me as the villain in her life, and so I very much and just embraced that role. And so, my strategies, just going back to them again, were being cold, being indifferent, being pouty, just pulling away. I think I was a very cold person to be around for her.
okay, yeah, now it's making sense.
So I wasn't, I was never a hummingbird husband. Like I wasn't like walking around her, walking behind her, or like trying to fix it or trying to appease her. Like I very much went the other way with it. And certainly one's not better than the other. That was just my approach.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I understand.
Hmm.
We're a lot alike that way, I think. Um, I mean, and all of us have all of these capacities. It's just we all learn kind of which forms of dysfunction are the most effective, to put it as nicely as possible. We just learn, okay, these ways work better for me than these ways, right? So, and some people learn a nice guy kind of a pattern. I think we get all of them at some point, but in marriage, there's a point where it seems like you just stick to something.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, they're all maladaptive behaviors.
yeah, that's a great way to say it.
Yeah, that
So,
that I learned, through growing up as a child, and then what I was influenced by the movies that I watched, um, the stories that interested me. Um, yeah, and Gladiator is a good example of that. I think that uh, Maximus was a very inspiring character to me. Certainly not someone that would go walking around like appeasing someone who was disenchanted with him in his life.
yeah.
Yeah,
So, can I ask you a fairly vulnerable question?
sure. I
How
reserve
would
the
your
right to
wife?
not answer it.
Okay, yeah, and I know it's tricky because if we're talking in public, right? So, and just for maybe people listening, one of the challenges for us in having these conversations is we value telling our story,
Mhm.
and when you're talking about a couple and a marriage, it's extremely important to us not to try to speak for our significant other.
Mhm.
Um, Realizing they had their own experience with us, and we don't want to say anything that dishonors them, no matter what our marital status is. So, from your understanding, I'm wondering, how do you think your wife would have described you 5 years ago? Like, what would her words be?
Mm.
That's something you can answer.
Various labels would include narcissist, gaslighter, controlling, jealous. Did I mention controlling?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
like an amusement park operator. I think her experience was being in an emotional roller coaster. Um, other labels or phrases I remember are walking around on pins and needles whenever she was in my presence. Those were like five
okay,
or six phrases that would
yeah.
describe her experience with me. Yeah.
And as a person who would be the ways you described, was that Was that reasonable?
Um, Looking back on it, yeah, she was. I mean, I respect her experience as her own, and that was her truth. But
Yeah.
there's validity to it. I understand that
Yeah.
that was her experience, especially based on what I just described as my sort of villainous strategy to get what I wanted.
Yeah. What a lot of us don't realize, and again, it's unknowing to the man that's caught in this, is that you have accidentally weaponized your partner's sense of security, emotional stability. Because, I mean, we all want emotional safety, especially in a relationship. And this is extremely important for females. And so if like you're warm one day and 30 minutes later, you're a total jerk, they start to feel jerked around. Um, they have to figure out the levers to keep you from being cold and distant and jerky because they want warmth, they want acceptance, they want groundedness, they want calmness, they want a lot of things which are I don't think they're unreasonable things, you know. And again, we're not talking right now about what we want because we're talking about owning our story, right? But but then women will feel very uneasy naturally because their sense of stability and safety is non-existent.
Yeah,
This is why they call us these things. And to point out, yeah, it's not unreasonable because for them to do that. I mean, I think I personally do not like the narcissist label because what most women are calling narcissism is insecurity. And it's not that I don't. Let me unpack this real briefly for the listener. My problem with the narcissist label is not the label; it's that people are falling into this trap of believing that that is an uncurable condition that the man has because they're not just calling men narcissists. They're then producing videos where like, this is unchangeable. He'll always be like this. And we know absolutely unequivocally that that's not true. That men grow out of their insecurities and these behaviors go away. Anyway, that's a little bit of a side note for the listener, not for you.
sure.
You
Yeah,
have grown out of these things, but um,
I what that brought up in me was if we could time travel, we could go back in time. I would choose a portal that was probably somewhere in 2018. Now, I wouldn't have agreed to this at the time, but let's just say
yeah,
there's a world where I would have agreed to it. What I really needed was I needed a sabbatical from my marriage and my approach to life entirely, and I needed to go away somewhere for like a crash course on emotional resiliency, value worth significance, self awareness. I needed to go away for 3 to 6 months to just start to develop an awareness about how I was being. Because I'm not even sure that I knew what were causing the reactions.
yeah. So I would describe it like this: if you are an insecure person, which is not, again, I'm not saying is shaming a person. Insecurity just means there's things in your life that are intended to be secure that aren't. Well, it's the nature of your brain. If something is not secure, your brain is going to be fixated on trying to make it secure. Let me use a great example. If you had not eaten for 5 days and I invited you to be a guest on this podcast, we're not going to have a very meaningful conversation because your brain is going to be on something else. Or if suddenly you just had to go to the bathroom really bad, you're going to pull back from this conversation because your brain's going to be saying, take care of that problem. You've got to go, right? And so what I wish more people understood is that for an insecure person, there's not a lack of desire. There isn't really a lack of empathy, compassion. It's not a permanent condition. It's that they're preoccupied subconsciously with trying to stay safe, right? And so a woman is not getting the best version of us, not because you're an asshole, but because your brain is trying to figure out how to keep these insecure places from turning into a complete disaster,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so what I find, and I think what you've found, is that if you boil all that down into its most distilled substance, it's that if you do not know your value, worth, and significance, if that's not secure,
Uh-huh.
you will go through all kinds of shenanigans to try to acquire a sense of value, worth, and significance that become to your brain and to your well-being. It's just pragmatic. They just they step into or between you and the people that you love, and so you stop hearing them. You stop being empathetic and compassionate and warm, and it's not because you don't want to be. It's that your brain is trying to solve that problem. And so what we find, I think you have found since then, is if you solve those insecurities, suddenly your natural state returns to like, yeah, I have space to listen to you. What would you like me to know? Right. But not so in marriage, is it?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe that. I think I was looking for a sense of safety outside of myself, and I think I spent some time like trying to secure like a foundation, making sure that the bedrock, the cornerstone in my life, my marriage, ensuring that that was secure. But I went around it. I went about it the wrong way. Now I know that that sense of safety and security, like it comes from within me, and I create that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
But what we do as insecure men is we're actually trying to make her in some way part of that sense of our security. So this is what screws the whole thing up is
hmm
she's coming to you and she wants you to be present and grounded and calm and okay. But because you get your well-being from her, this is what is, I would say, is classic enmeshment. Um, her disturbance is leading you to a place of feeling insecure. So,
hmm
so now you have two people who are feeling insecure and trying to get their sense of security from one another, and it creates gridlock. And now what? Right? It's a standoff because you're each trying to get something from each other
hmm
that, and both feeling insecure in that moment.
yeah,
Um,
it's like
and
another
so,
human being approaching you and saying, my cup's half empty. Like, will you help me to fill it? And then my reaction would have been like, wait, my cup's empty. Like I'm looking for you to fill
yeah,
it, right? How can you
that's
be
it.
how can
That's
you be
it.
coming to me? Like I'm looking for you
Right.
to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of modern views of these things would just tell you, okay, Mike, you pour a little bit of your cup. I know you don't want to, but pour some into her. She needs it right now. But you had to become empty to do that. And so you have resentment now.
hmm
And then, and okay, now it's her turn. Now you pour into Mike's cup a little bit.
hmm
And now she's got resentment because it ends up being this gig
hmm
where you can't have two people that feel good at the same time because they're trying to share like, a limited portion of well-being. And this is why it doesn't work. And so a lot of even therapeutic approaches, counseling approaches, just try to create a referee situation for that to like, okay, whose turn is it to feel good? And I'm not saying that's not to be dismissive of therapy and counseling. I'm just saying, if you don't fix the worldview that your well-being comes from outside of you, it's a race to the bottom
hmm
in marriage because it ultimately somebody's going to feel depleted and somebody's going to feel full and somebody's going to be deeply resentful and another person is going to feel also resentful because even though you gave them your well-being, they want to be with somebody with well-being,
hmm
right? Like who wants to walk around with a deeply resentful partner all the time, right? So,
hmm
uh, yeah, that's what blew up my marriage too before I was able to turn it around. But
It's illogical. It's a bankrupt approach.
yeah,
It leads to scorekeeping. And certainly a great deal of resentment on both sides.
yeah. So if you could do it again, you'd have gone to some sort of a boot camp.
I think, yeah, a boot
Uh,
camp or whatever it might have taken for me to start to gain an awareness about
yeah,
how
yeah,
I was showing up, ultimately how I was showing up for myself every day, and therefore those around me. Yeah,
yeah.
it might
I,
not have sunk in after 3 or 6 months. It would have taken many reps, but I could have started to develop an awareness so that I didn't get the outcome that I got, which isn't the outcome that I wanted for sure. I
yeah,
don't want to be divorced.
I understand.
Yep.
Yeah, and not to, I don't intend this to sound like a commercial. Um, but actually, just to be open and honest and authentic myself is, you know, we do have that boot camp. Interestingly, it's not a experience where you go away,
Hmm.
but I did invite you into that myself a little bit. But at the same time, like you said, you weren't in a place to know that you needed that,
Hmm.
and that's a hard thing to also observe, like to know, like, yeah, there's a thing here that it will take care of this, but you might not see it right now. Um,
Right.
but yeah, what do you think? Like, what would you have learned in such a boot camp, or an experience where you went away for a 6 month solo adventure of exploring emotional resilience? Like, what have been the takeaways
Hmm.
at the end of that? What would you have learned?
If I could work backwards, I would have learned that the stress that I was putting on needing a particular outcome was undermining everything in my life. That paradoxically, the thing that I wanted most, like all of my attempts to create that, were really working against me, and I I was
Are you
repet.
saying marriage? Like, are you saying trying to make marriage work was
Yep.
working against
Yeah.
you? Okay.
Ultimately, like I repelled the person that I love the most rather than attracting her to me. Um.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you have an explanation of why that is? Like, why? Because this is going to be mind boggling for a lot of people listening, how focusing on your marriage can lead to the end of your marriage. I mean, I know why, but I'm wondering if you wanted to explain like how that works. How does focusing on your marriage lead to it breaking?
Hmm.
Well, specifically trying to focus on keeping your marriage.
Hmm. Because for me to show up in my life how I want to show up and live according to the values that I have, I primarily need to focus on the things that I know work for me, that allow me to be who I like to be. Um, when some of those things, when those things are in line, um, and I'm focused on the things that I'm interested in my life, my work, my interests, my hobbies, then
Self care.
the self care, then the romantic interest in my life becomes the icing on the cake. It becomes a nice to have. And then, so since that's not my primary objective every day, then I kind of get the relationship that I wanted in the end
And that they wanted,
and
interestingly,
that they want.
because
Right.
there's emotional safety when you do that. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, our romantic interests, they don't want to be our mothers. They don't want to be our therapists. They want to be wooed. They want to be dated. And I definitely had the order, the hierarchy. I had it backwards. It was upside down for me. So
So you were making marriage the cake.
I was,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I know this feeling. Yeah. It's paradoxical. The way I like to describe this is if you make marriage or another person first,
Mhm.
you'll you'll always compromise your authentic self at some point in order to do that. And in the process, you lose integrity, you lose your trustability, you lose your emotional safety because you're clinging to something in an out of it's out of order, right? So like if marriage is more important than being authentic, you'll be inauthentic and unmarried. or miserably married in the long run. It's kind of a weird truth, but again, paradoxical. The best thing you can do for all of humanity is to be unapologetically deeply yourself and know who that is and accept who that is. And when you are, you're an emotionally safe partner. And an emotionally safe partner creates a great marriage because he's not showing up as insecure, nasty, narcissistic, controlling asshole husband.
Mm-hmm.
He's showing up actually as a man that feels okay. And but yeah, that's paradoxical because to a lot of people it sounds like, well, isn't that turning away from her? Isn't that turning away? Um, no, it's actually allows you to fully turn towards your partner, like as yourself. Because in reality, like, why would you want to be married if you couldn't be yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the paradox of it. Like, and that's the part that repels. Like, showing up in relationship as a kind, warm, confident human being is what draws them in and creates connection. Uh, being in, living my life then, where I was being harshly critical of myself, I was judging myself, I was judging those around me, and I didn't understand then that the judgment is always going to breed disconnection in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did this start to turn around since you didn't have such a period that you wish you could have taken? How did you start to acquire some of these shifts in your understanding?
Hmm. The tools that I used were did a lot of reading, a lot of personal growth reading. Uh, I immersed myself in reading, podcasts. I joined a men's community. I started to value things like honesty, not using another human being as a means to some personal end of mine. I started to value self-reliance, ownership. Um, a big thing for me was the way that I spoke to myself internally, like not using such extreme language, being more kind and gentle with the way that I spoke to myself, and then that started to manifest itself outwardly toward others in situations that I was in.
Can you give us an example of what that kind of extreme language towards yourself might have sounded like?
Oh yeah, like I'm always it's always going to be like this. Like I'm always screwing up. I never do it right. She never, she always. Yeah. Well,
So lots of
and I
always,
I didn't
never talk.
understand like how talking to myself like that perpetually uh was was creating what I didn't want in my life.
Yeah, you're literally programming how your brain works by how you speak to yourself.
Hmm. Yeah. Um yeah, so I started to develop a high regard for myself, for being okay, recognizing that I'm okay. And an important aspect of that was brotherhood that I started. Uh, I think that I always valued it, but my actions didn't say that I valued it. Whereas
Mm.
now, like I intentionally put time with other men that I value on my calendar. So we can talk about some of these more vulnerable aspects of life, and they
Yeah.
can mirror back to me deficiencies or a perspective that I might need to tweak and just challenge me lovingly to maybe see a situation a little bit differently.
Yeah, tell us more about that. I was going to ask you anyway, like what role have community and coaching and whatnot, like what role has all that stuff played in this for you?
It's played or if I could like put it into quadrants, I would say that it occupies like 1/4 of the quadrant. it's a place, it's an avenue for me to take some of my values, apply them to examples in my life or stories, and just take it and put them out there in a non-judgmental place, and get perspective back. And some of that perspective and some of those challenges maybe over the years have, maybe I didn't like it at the time and it didn't feel good and it made me feel uncomfortable. But in the end, I was open-hearted about it. I recognized that no one was trying to hurt me, and I've been able to course correct and weave a better story to live in for myself.
So it sounds like you had to make a shift between doing it alone and having, to a degree, guidance, but even just reflection. And I wonder who, as people listen to this, if they might be confused about how you're saying that, but you're also talking about self-reliance, because self-reliance is kind of a byword these days. So could you unpack how you could embrace self-reliance, but also community for people listening, just to kind of talk about some of that nuance?
Yeah, I think self-reliance means a lot of different things, or it could take the form of a lot of different things. But for me, what it means is that I'm responsible and I have the power to create the kind of life that I want to live. I always have the opportunity every day to accept the conditions in my life, to have gratitude for the good and bad. Like I can be grateful for, some of the less positive things in my life. I can take ownership of those. And then again, yeah, I can tell that story. I can use a variety of examples, and I can take that to a friend on a hike or on a Zoom conference, or and then it helps me to live the kind of life that I want to live. And I think that it also provides value for, it's a community service, right? Being vulnerable, being open, um, can maybe help someone that's not like at the exact same spot I am on the path. That's maybe like a little bit farther behind. They're on the same journey, but they're maybe not where I am. And that can help them change their perspective on something that's happening in their life.
It sounds to me like you're describing a certain, maybe you could call it emotional self-reliance, where you're not looking to other people to be your source of well-being, but you recognize that there's a fundamentally value in practicing that in a community setting or with others.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
I'm talking about self-reliance emotionally, not necessarily like Henry David Thoreau and building a cabin out in the woods and just doing it all on myself and never needing another human being. I don't.
yeah,
I don't mean self-reliance that way.
yeah. It's really very. It's quite specific. Yeah, even in a lot of men's work, there's kind of like oftentimes a mentality of I don't need anybody, and you're not saying that either. You're saying it's what do you what role do people play in your life? Are they the source? Are they giving you something you don't have, or something different? Right. Um,
And I think
yeah, it's very,
self-reliance is also understanding like the complexities, the landscape in our own heart. And it's saying, well, I see these various stories in my community, or I see how this is effective for other people, but this isn't the thing that's in my heart. And so part of self-reliance is recognizing what's your authentic truth, like what is your true north, and
yeah.
choosing to pursue that.
I can hear some Derek Sievers influence in those words. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You want to unpack that a little bit more? And also just a question: do you feel that liberty in the Masterful community, just to feel like you can hear ideas discussed, but not feel necessarily pressured to embrace any of them as with dogma or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel the freedom and liberty to always question the things that I'm believing, to unpack my beliefs, to journal about them, to write out a belief that I have. Like, I never want to use another human being as a means to some personal end. Like jot out like several scenarios where I've probably done that in the past. I might do that tomorrow, and then share that with the community, with others, for feedback on that. Yeah.
Could you talk about the role of the useful, not true concept? This is something I recognize as a passion of yours, and I don't think it's been a small part of your story. But I'm curious if you could share a little bit about that. How has that shifted the way you approach your own life?
Mhm.
Maybe tell us what it is first, and then explain how that tool has helped you.
Yeah, and I think we talk about this maybe a little bit in the Renewed Masculine Men course, where it's looking at the results that we have in our lives, and being honest about, are these the results that we have in our lives, and what actions, what beliefs are leading us there. So useful, not true is, we have X amount of beliefs in our lives. Are these useful? Are these taking taking us through our actions to the places that we want to go? Um, because outside of like physical laws in nature, there's a lot of the things that we say aren't like absolutely verifiably true. They just become useful beliefs. And there's a distinction there between recognizing if the results we have in our life are the ones that we want, then we need to re-examine the beliefs that are driving those actions.
Yeah, I love that. Just like seeing the relationship between beliefs and results.
Hmm. Yeah, so
And so,
I think that's how, using that as a lens when I hear someone, because we're constantly influenced by the world around us. All the pings, the dings and rings are as soon as we open an email or social media, like we're being influenced by someone else's belief. And it's nice to go into that saying, is this useful? Is this true? Or, when someone says something to you, maybe that they strongly believe in, uh, you need to vote a certain way, or you need to do this to live a good life. Like adding a question mark to that, like
yeah,
removing the sense that it's a statement and adding a question mark to it. Oh, so I need to vote this way, instead of like I need to vote this way. Yeah,
yeah, I love it. Yeah.
useful things to pick up along the way to help filter what we're exposed to in the world every day.
One of the things I really love about this idea is that it helps you to let go of judgments, realizing
Yeah.
there's really no need to answer a question
Mm-mm.
in most cases. I haven't found any yet. Is it true? Um, and one of the things you get wrapped around the axle about as a human is if you need to answer that question, you're going to drive yourself mad because without being a creative deity of some kind, you can't.
Mhm.
So it's not that objective truth isn't a thing. It's that are you qualified to say what it is? And if you let go of the idea that you need to answer, is it true? And instead say, well, I just need to answer if it's useful.
Mhm.
Because, um, well, now I've actually applied the one meaningful metric I can apply as a human, which is, will this idea produce the fruit in my life that I'm looking for?
Yeah.
And if it's not, why would I cling to it?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right. If we circle back or revert back to that "I miss you" example, um, it's good to like question that in the moment. Like, what is this individual saying? Are they saying "I miss you" like in a needy sense? Or they're just are they trying to? Is this a bid for connection? Um,
yeah.
how can I use this in a useful way? Maybe it's not true that I don't necessarily miss this person in the moment, but I can choose to see it as a bid for connection. Um, and also just a mirror in my life. Like it's like the back of my head that I can't see. Maybe there's a little bit more for me to give here in this situation to let this individual be seen, known, heard, understood. Um, so I like you can use that filter in a number of different ways. The useful, not true, and I think it removes the statement that
Yeah.
it helps you to add a question mark to it and just approach it with curiosity.
I find it helps in another way, in that it helps me. It has been helping me. I'm relatively new to that book, not necessarily to the concepts because they're very stoic concepts. But I love thinking about useful, not true, because then when I go to communicate something, it helps me remember to like, hey, I don't need to present this as with any form of dogma or um, I don't have to present this as it has to be this way, but just think about it as useful. And it's changed the way I relate to people, like in both communicating but also hearing,
Mhm.
because it's allowed me to hear like when a person is really married to the idea of something being true, I would suggest it's a giveaway that they're experiencing deep insecurity.
Mhm.
Like they're really married to that a belief being true, which is fear.
Mhm.
And if somebody's afraid, they're not secure. Um,
Well, yeah,
and so,
using that an example, like I was certainly married to the idea that being married, that I could never be happy again, without that. Um, it caused me a lot of pain. It caused me a lot of grief. And it was never very useful. And I didn't see it that way. I didn't see the painful results that was leading. Um, a different,
so
yeah, go ahead.
that sounds like one place you started to practice detachment was by starting to challenge the belief that you weren't okay if you weren't married.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay,
That,
so where did that take you? Besides not being married.
well, yeah,
uh,
but that became the gift in my life. I didn't see it at the time, but I see, even though I didn't get the outcome that I wanted, I still see this whole process as a gift. Um,
yeah,
because I am happy. I do experience like moments of joy, sometimes intense moments of joy. I'm generally at peace and calm and have good relationships with those around me. Um, and it all started by breaking down the belief that I had at the time that in order for me to be okay, I needed to be married to this one woman of 8 billion people here on the earth, or however many billions there are.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What else would you like us to know about that process of uncoupling? Um, is there anything else that kind of helped you go the direction you went? Like you've been clear, and I'm trying to be sensitive. It's hard to talk about the dissolution of a marriage because there's two people, right? So I just acknowledge and honor that. Meaning, in these questions, I realize how being on your side of the interview here, a little tricky to talk about that because you're also thinking about telling the story in a way that's noble.
Hmm.
Um, but you told us, hey, I didn't want this outcome. You detached from it
Hmm.
and you didn't get it.
Hmm.
You didn't get the outcome you want. Can you explain in ways that still feel authentic and aligned with your values? Are you able to explain to us why?
Sure. Yeah. over the years, I became interested in this concept of a drama triangle, and I started to recognize and think about it more in different conversations and interactions. And when I became clear about who I am and the life that I was living, and that I was living authentically and according to my values, I suddenly, not suddenly, but over time, I realized that I couldn't reconcile the dissonance of another person's viewpoint, that I was their persecutor, and that I was
Yeah.
also there was a demand upon me to also be their rescuer at the same time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I, I couldn't make those two. I couldn't be. It didn't make sense to me that I could be both of those things. And so the only thing that I knew to do is just to step outside of that and not be either of those, because I didn't see myself as either of those things.
Yeah. It's impossible circumstance for any relationship. And just to unpack that for people who don't know about the drama triangle, think of that like a psychological model where there's somebody who's feeling like a victim, and they're feeling, this is a little bit outside of what you'd normally find in drama triangle stuff, but I have tons of videos about this. If you're a victim, when you're feeling like a victim inside of your thinking, you will perceive a person or circumstances that are causing your victimhood. That's the persecutor. And you will perceive a person or circumstances who could rescue you from your victimhood. That's the rescuer. And generally speaking, when people are feeling victimized in marriage, they're seeing their spouse as the persecutor and a different version of their spouse as being the rescuer. And it basically is like, if you would just stop doing this and start doing that,
Mm-hmm.
you'd stop being my persecutor and start being my rescuer.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, just to unpack what you're not saying a little bit,
Okay.
when you become a rescuer to somebody else, you generally have to become a victim in the process, because you have to become inauthentic. It usually requires you to meet standards and expectations that feel completely not aligned with who you are, right? To kind of tell a dumb version of this, but imagine you're with a woman who says, if you loved me, you'd go rob this bank with me.
Mm-hmm.
I know that sounds silly, but people put all these kinds of loyalty tests on relationships all the time. If you loved me, you'd do this. If you love me, you'd stop doing this. But if you're a person that says, well, I'm not okay robbing a bank, now that victim says, well, then you don't love me. And you're the persecutor because you won't rob the bank. And if you'd go rob the bank with them, you'd be a rescuer and they'd feel loved. And this is the dynamic of a drama triangle. And some people make participating in their drama triangle the only way they'll relate. And I'm not suggesting that's what your wife is doing. I'm just saying this. I work with some men who they're in a spot where their spouse will not accept anything but a rescuer to their persecution.
Mm-hmm.
And it's checkmate for all intents and purposes, because the only way for a man to do that is to go back into this place of being inauthentic, which makes him a victim, which breeds resentment in him, because now he has to live in a way that he can't do it and be himself.
Yeah.
That sound about right?
That sounds spot on. Yeah. And through that process, like I'm not denying her or anyone's experience,
Sure.
their feelings, like, that was really her experience of the situation.
Yeah.
And I honored that, tried to honor that and respected that. Um, and at the same time, like her perspective on me was neither useful nor true.
Yeah. Right.
And I couldn't accept that as my own.
So just to be clear about this, the person experiencing a victimhood is in legitimate pain.
Mhm.
There's no denying that whatsoever. It's that sometimes people in legitimate pain become convinced that the only solution to their pain is a change in you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a zero-sum game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard for a lot of people to hear right now, because if your worldview is that the outside causes the inside, you're stuck. I have a lot of physicians I work with, and we use this example all the time. Imagine if I had AFib or some sort of heart condition, and I became convinced. I dragged my wife to the doctor and I say, would you please tell her to change her diet, start exercising, and take medicine, because my heart is not working right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we recognize that would be nonsense, but we do this emotionally. We actually promote this idea. Oh, I'm having an internal pain problem, and if these people would just change, I could feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an impossible situation, but this is what people live. This is a delusion people live in. And so, like, your whole life becomes jumping through hoops so that people can find out, oh, that doesn't make me feel better either.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, it's an impossible situation. And it doesn't mean their pain. This is just what I want to underscore. Their pain is not invalid.
Right.
Their strategy for resolving their pain, though, is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the challenge. It's learning to appreciate, hey, this person's in legitimate pain, but I can't rescue them from their pain.
Right.
And sometimes you can step out of the drama triangle, actually a lot of times in a marriage, and it turns things around, but sometimes you can't.
It's interesting. And how do you, when you step out of that dynamic, but you still in your heart, you recognize,
you have compassion for them.
Yeah, you have compassion. You recognize that their pain's legit, because you felt that way too. Like I definitely had felt that way before in my life. And while someone was not necessarily maybe asking for my guidance or my wisdom, in a loving way, I tried to offer that up. Like, it's our thoughts. It's the things that we're ruminating on. It's the choices that we're making about how to live our lives that are, often leading to these feelings that we have. It's not the person you're in relationship with that's breaking your, causing the pain.
When you say that to a person in victimhood, it's deeply offensive to them.
Mm-hmm.
That goes with being a victim. The whole reason we feel victim in a state of victimhood is we are believing we're powerless, and we're believing, psychologically so, that a persecutor is causing our problem. And so I want you to appreciate this, because this is behind a lot of accusations of narcissism. When a person who is perceived as the persecutor tells you you have to own your own pain, it just looks narcissistic. Mm-hmm. This is a huge challenge, right? And it's even now supported by so many people of like, yeah, if somebody won't fix your internal pain, they're a narcissist. But this is irrational. With 8 billion people on the planet, how many of them am I responsible for their emotional pain? And if I have to pay any cost to make somebody's emotional pain go away, then I don't actually matter. So I can't do that without myself being a victim. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
So this is the challenge. I would say all marriages get to a point where both parties are in drama triangles. That is what gridlock is in a marriage, is two people are feeling essentially like victims, mm-hmm. and waiting for their partner to step into a rescuer role, and mad as hell that they're in a persecutor role. Mm-hmm. And so just, for, again, people listening, what we do in our community is we help a man lead himself out of a drama triangle so that he stops living in that dynamic. And about 8.5 times out of 10, that will turn the whole marriage around, because he stops living as a victim, which creates emotional safety for him that he then shares with a partner, and then allows him to see his partner's pain without accepting the blame. Yep. And then it's a combination of wooing and caring for and patience. But you can't do that at the expense of your own well-being. This is what I would say. This is why sometimes divorce is necessary, because some people don't want to leave the drama triangle. And it has nothing to do with their character. They're not a horrible person. They're just deeply in pain.
Mm-hmm.
And the only solution they'll accept is for you to, be a certain way, admit to certain things. I call it the blood confession. Like a lot of people that are in tremendous pain, men and women alike. This is not unique to women. They won't accept anything other than your signed confession in blood that you think things, do things, say things, etc., that are just patently not true or useful.
Yeah. I
Right.
remember using that scenario. If any Game of Thrones fans out there remember Cersei's walk of shame, I think you just used the phrase blood confession, but I often felt like I could use my very best empathetic listening skills, all my compassion. But in the end, it wasn't enough. I felt like a walk of shame was required, or like I needed to cut off a limb or something. There was
Yeah.
a payment that was required.
Yes. Yeah.
And I didn't, I could never really figure out how to make that payment. And in the
That's
end,
it.
and in the
Yeah.
end, I wasn't able to
Yeah. It's
offer up
like,
enough sacrifices of myself.
yeah, you realize there's nothing else I could pay other than the loss of self. And that's not a price I'm willing to pay. And there's no situation where that's virtuous. Um, I mean, this is a different scenario, but I mean, I talk to a tremendous amount of people in sexless marriages, and this dynamic is behind it. Like they have just eroded themselves. They have just sold all this authenticity to trying to keep a relationship, going in some direction. And so they just keep denying themselves, sacrificing. This is actually, a shadow of men that does this. It's not working. It just makes them deeply bitter and resentful. And they still don't get what they're after. They don't have a happy marriage. They don't have intimacy. Meanwhile, they're basically, they're cutting off limbs. I'm going to cut this one off. Okay, that didn't work. And at some point, you're left with just a limbless corpse that has a head, but it's just barely holding on, right? It doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, while I wanted a happy marriage, I wasn't willing to sell my soul to get it. I wasn't willing to sell out myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, meanwhile, most women on the other side of that would say, yeah, me either.
Mm-hmm.
Me either, right?
Sure.
And it's not unfair because there was a time in gridlock where that's what their experience was too. Like they had to become someone they didn't want to be in order to stay married. So yeah, this is challenging stuff. And so, for somebody listening, a very reliable way to go through this is become a man who does not live in drama triangles. Become a man who is not living in victimhood, and learn to live there for a solid year. And to be a guy who knows how to create his own well-being. And if you do that and you're living as that, see what happens. And I wouldn't advise anybody to make divorce decisions until that, because divorcing from a place of victimhood it's victimhood.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't actually fix anything, which is hard to hear for people. But become great at captaining your ship before you scuttle your boat.
Right. Yeah, and
but it doesn't mean.
I think this process for me, for a little more context, took 4.5 years to play out. So even when you start to develop some self-awareness about some of these concepts, it doesn't happen overnight. Just like any training in any area, it requires a lot of reps.
Yeah.
And so, you can't take a course or read a book or listen to a couple podcasts. It takes time. It maybe shouldn't take 4.5 years, but it took me a while to get to the place where I am today.
Yeah, it's a guy who spends a good bit of time with you. I know that that's loving, meaning I've never witnessed you throwing your ex partner under the bus, meaning I've spent enough time with you to know that you don't blame
Mhm.
and that you see it as like, well, this was the loving way I could go forward where what seemingly was best for both of us. But that doesn't make it a non painful truth.
Yeah, that's useful. I think it's also useful that uh,
Good catch.
I think it's also useful that I 100% own the point that my marriage got to, through 2018, 2019. I own the state that it got to. This version of me could have mitigated those circumstances, and I likely would have got the outcome that I was looking for, but it turned out it
Can
was
you
too little, too late.
can you unpack the difference for anybody listening between you saying I own that and it's my fault?
Sure. Yeah, I own the conditions in my life. I feel as though I have I'm a I'm a creator, and I can create the situations that I want in my life. Um, I can't control the outcomes, but I can put myself in a good position to, yeah, live the kind of life I want to live. I kind of think of it as like when our children are smaller, we kind of put them in timeout, or we put them in a playpen, so that they don't like inadvertently like swallow poison or fall down the steps.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so owning like those kind of conditions so that I can excel within like a very narrow bandwidth.
So you don't blame yourself. It's not about fault. It's just you saying, um, it's my responsibility for how my life unfolded.
Yeah.
Does that feel like a fair way to say it?
Yeah, it
All right.
almost sounds like a play on words, or like we're trying to put a spin on it, but maybe that's maybe that's true to a degree, but
I see it as related to the grace that you talked about earlier, which is just you're looking back and saying,
thanks. That's the
I
word I was looking
see.
for, grace. Yes.
I mean, yeah, it's an acknowledgement of where I could have been differently,
Yep.
but without shaming myself for it, or also realizing I didn't know how to be different. I know I didn't do it because I'm a horrible person or something like that. I didn't know what I didn't know.
Mhm.
And so I take responsibility for how I've led myself in life,
Mhm.
um, and what it's created for me. But I don't like blame. What I don't like about blame is that blame is just useless. It's just an attempt to judge sometimes ourselves, sometimes other people for the past, but you get nothing for it.
Mhm.
Like, let's just say it's not useful or true, right? Um,
Mhm.
it's just okay. So if I blame somebody, it's her fault. It's my fault. Okay, now what? What do I do with that? Where responsibility and ownership is more oriented about like whose role is it to take me in the direction I want to go.
Mhm.
um,
But yeah, if
so
I'm
yeah,
saying that I own the results that I have in my life, that's different than saying I'm blaming myself, because if I'm blaming myself, then I'm just going to keep getting what I've got in the past. I'm going to continue to live in a state of victimhood and powerlessness. Um,
yeah,
it's not a state of grace or gratitude or acceptance.
yep. You'll probably
It's
do it
more
to
like
other people.
blame is like more like Eeyore.
Hmm. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
very low, melancholy, stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, stuck.
So can you tell us a little bit about what life is like now? It sounds like you've put yourself through your own kind of emotional resiliency boot camp without having to necessarily go away. Maybe it took a little bit longer than a targeted journey would have taken. But where has that led you? What is it creating for you now as a divorced man?
Yeah, I want to paint a picture that for a man that might be in this situation, or might need to go down this path in his life or choose to go down this path, that um yeah, there's a wonderful life on the other side of divorce. So I'm 15 or 16 months into this. It was very difficult for me to recreate home. I had to redefine what home even meant to me. I went through various iterations of, well, what even is home? Is this just the house that I live in? Um, so my working definition of home right now is it's a place where there's no obstacles to my thriving. And so I tie that.
That's a great. I love it.
Yeah. Um, so I am very intentional about cultivating that environment here for myself and for others.
Say that again. Home is what?
Home is a place with no obstacles to my thriving. So
Yeah,
an
that's
example of
great.
an obstacle might be blaming myself for where I am. I'm kind of like in a what I would consider like a starter home. When I was in my 20s or 30s. I'm in a
Yeah.
community where I don't necessarily want to live. Um, I don't get to see my children every day. I live with one of my children, but I don't have the family dynamic. Holidays, traditions, all of those things, they're all different. Um, I can choose to look at them in a negative sense, or I can choose an approach that helps me to thrive within those situations. So I have an opportunity
Yeah.
to create new traditions or a different approach, not better, but
Could you unpack a little bit about how you are navigating those tremendously difficult spots? Because this is every man's fear. I mean, when a man is not divorced and he's facing it, it's those things he's in his mind. He's catastrophizing. You know, all his pain and sorrow and grief and impossible hard feelings. And I'm not saying they're not hard, but maybe you can unpack like how have you navigated those? What skills, understanding, perspectives, like what has served you in navigating those tough spots?
Mhm. Yeah, when I look back on it, and sometimes I do look back over these months, it doesn't maybe seem like 15 or 16 months. That doesn't sound like a very long stretch of time, but it seems a lot longer to me. Uh, so when I look back on it, I'm like, I can't believe I did that. Like, I can't believe that I got to this point in my life. Like, it seems impossible. Like, um, but the real life day to day things, I can remember things that I would walk out onto my new front porch in my new community in the morning, and I would look around and I would be like, this is where I live. Very dejected, very like, how did this happen? Right.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and over time, just like that little scenario of going out in the morning, which is part of my self-care routine, getting some early morning sunlight, going out onto my porch. So that's been my habit for a while. And over the course of days and weeks, it went from a dejected, this is where I live, to this is where I live. This is great. Like, what can we do from operating from this point of view, right? And
Did that
so
happen
with
on its own, or was it deliberate?
it was me choosing to focus my attention on acceptance and gratitude, not
Okay.
not fighting the circumstances constantly. Not Yeah,
Good.
there's a little nuance there with acceptance, and um, it's almost like
Yeah.
embracing the circumstances that are in my life and not wanting them to necessarily change. I have some ideas about where I want to go with my life, but I don't dwell on those too much. They're just goals out in the future. But so that was pivotal for me. Acceptance and gratitude, and just the way that I talk to myself about it, even out loud.
Mhm.
This is where I live. We can thrive from here, starting today.
It
I
sounds
even
like
threw that out
just
there. I think of me as we. That's how I talk to myself.
yeah,
There's
that's
this
okay.
like being that people see and hear me talk and listen to. But then there's the my inmost being, that's kind of captaining the ship.
That's a very integrated way to think. I think it could be. You could choose to see it as an integrated way to speak to yourself. Um, I mean, I'm a pattern guy, right? So what I hear you saying and describing that is you started to see that you have choices.
Yeah.
And you started to make them. And that's really the path through any form of emotional turmoil. And it's how you stay out of the victimhood of a drama triangle is you start to look for a useful belief. And what you find over time is a useful belief is one that sees yourself as having choices. I think Derek Sievers would agree.
Yeah, he would
um,
agree.
yeah.
Another aspect of this was, I wouldn't say that I doubled down on some of the foundational principles, but I took my focus away from, getting lost on YouTube or watching TV or, the various ways that we entertain ourselves. And I focused my attention on the self-care principles that I know are effective for me. Um, I also, another focus was, or is, continues to be brotherhood, like we referenced earlier, but always having social outings with my children on the calendar. So, and that would be another thing that I would say to, another man that might be in this situation. My relationship with all of my children has improved, because my focus is like less on this house and some of the other things in my life. And when I'm with them, or when I'm with anyone, like I'm 100% present with them. I'm not, oftentimes when our kids are small, like we're doing household chores and duties and we're just sort of around them and sort of policing them. But it can be a really cool thing, for your relationship with your children to grow in a new way. And it creates opportunities in life to talk about some of the things we're talking about. Uh, One of the things that we keep going back to, and my children will report some testimony back in their life, is another Derek Sivers ism, which is the concept of using hell yeah or no as a way to filter choices and opportunities in our lives. Briefly, if an opportunity isn't a hell yes, then the answer is no. Because if we're like tepid about opportunities in our life, then we're going to kind of have a calendar full of things that we're not very excited about, and then all of a sudden a life that's not very exciting. All that to say,
Yeah.
that it's it's been a cool place for my kids to just approach me about some of these things and apply them to
So
in their lives.
So it's not that divorce created this per se, but that the circumstances of the last 4.5 years have allowed you to become a version of yourself that is more present, more decisive, more connected, and that has improved a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, smile. I smile a lot. I smile a lot more. Um,
Yeah, I know you're old, the old look on your face.
yeah.
I know what that was. I know what that was like. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know
The-
how other people experience that, but I don't. Uh, I certainly am not cultivating like an intimidating presence about me for sure. Yeah, I really value empathetic listening. Um, One of the things I coach myself on is like I'm well versed on my story and the details in my life, the things that I ruminate on, like the shallower parts of our lives, the emails, all the things that constantly come into our attention. Um, but when I'm with other people, I just try to let that go, because why do I want to bore them with something that I'm kind of bored with in my own life? And I'm
yeah.
much more interested in what they have to say and what's going on in their life. So that's certainly been a positive outcome of this experience for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
being present with others.
It makes life adventurous. there's so much in my own past I don't even remember because I wasn't present, because I would like
Yeah.
spun up in the insecurities of my subconscious. But
And
now,
I'm never going into a like a meetup or a date or a scenario where I need something from that person,
yeah,
which is liberating.
it's all of the mental chatter that came with that, where you're thinking about what they're thinking about, and I thought that was just normal life for most of my life. So like having that be absent is such a gift, because you can just show up for a meeting with anybody and have it just no anxiety about it whatsoever,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's a gift.
bringing the barber back into it, and his observation that barbers are oftentimes therapists, you know, just someone there to listen to what's going on in your life. In that scenario, like he's never that for me. I just enjoy the banner, all the witty chatter, and
Yeah,
I'm never approaching a situation like that where I know that Kyle's a really good listener, and so I'm just going to dump all this stuff out on him. Like I'd much prefer to hear what's going on in his life.
yeah,
That's it's kind of a cool little
that's
thing that
cool.
comes out of.
Yeah, and that's probably true for most of your interactions that way, and that people get the best you, and interestingly, they get the best experience of themselves too, because friendships and even barber relationships. Do you remember that feeling when you're walking around with neediness? So many of your interactions disappoint you because you didn't get what you needed.
Mhm.
Like that's how you approach things. I remember I used to go to these like family get-togethers, and I would be so mopey when I'd get back because
Mhm.
I didn't get my quote unquote my needs met. I was just that trapped. I haven't felt that way in probably 7 or 8 years, and it's just been hugely lightening. And I'm sure, but for the people in my life, I think it's been a lot better too.
Mhm.
You talked about your kids, but how is that? How is that way of being showing up for you in dating? What what has that created?
Oh wow, it's quite an experience dating. But yeah, one of the first things I'd like to say about dating is I like the idea of being in relationship, not just romantic relationship, but any relationship. Like the person you're in relationship with, they can mirror back some of the things about you that maybe you're not seeing,
Mhm.
but they can also like mirror and magnify, you know, your love back to you. Because sometimes we're not at our best, and maybe shame or fears, they're kind of like helping us to not see life as it is. So I like that aspect of relationship, and I see it that way. And I see dating that way. Um,
Can you say
but
more
I am
about that?
not
Like,
like going into like any of these dating scenarios with any attachment to any sort of outcome. What dating Ultimately, what dating has done for me, how it served me to this point is it's helping me refine what I want in romantic relationship. If anything, sometimes I wonder if I even want a romantic relationship because I don't find a whole lot of need in my day-to-day life for it.
yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah.
go
So it's
ahead. I
not.
think I interrupted.
No, you're not coming from that perspective with scorn and contempt for women. It just um, we kind of jokingly sometimes use the term finding somebody who improves upon your solitude. And that's hard for a lot of people to imagine, because a very wounded man can't imagine being alone because doesn't know how to be okay being alone. So solitude frightens the shit out of him, right? But when you like yourself, and I don't mean that in an arrogant, self absorbed way, but like when you enjoy and accept yourself, solitude is a gift. It's like, I love solitude.
Mhm.
But so finding somebody who improves that
Mhm.
is like the question,
I like that.
right? And what's the criteria for improving solitude? It's challenging. We could probably have a whole conversation about this, and maybe we will. Maybe we'll have it. You and a couple other guys get on and do some dating after divorce.
Yeah, I think the divorce bomb, one of the uh, positive effects for that in my life has been I relish my solitude. I it brings me a great deal of joy, and I like how can this relationship improve upon my solitude. I was also thinking about that recently in terms of like the questions we ask in life, the questions we ask ourselves. Is this a potent question or is this an impotent question? And I was coming to the conclusion like if, unless the question that I ask is improving upon the silence, I should just be quiet. I think you can sort of use that like a little filter in a number of different ways. Is this improving upon the silence or the solitude?
Yeah. Actually, you know, I don't have a ton of divorced clients. I mean, like I said, about 15% maybe, because most most often things don't go that route. And not that divorce is inferior. I just want to be really clear about that. Um, but so when I talk to a guy who's saying the things you are saying, typically I would ask him the same kind of coaching questions I would actually ask a married man, because I think a guy who's dating after divorce needs to ask some of the same questions a man who's still married after the other side of liking yourself, which is, um, do I like who I'm becoming in this relationship? I think this is kind of my favorite thing. Like I've stopped asking long-term commitment questions even about my own wife, because it's not my criteria anymore. My criteria is not like, did she say forever and for always? Did I? It's, are we becoming our best selves by being with each other?
Mm-hmm.
And would we be better if we weren't?
Mm-hmm.
And as long as the answer is, I'm becoming my best version of me by being in this relationship, I'm going to be in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, knock on wood, I haven't been divorced, so I don't know this, but I think that would be my criteria about improving on my solitude, because relationships, I think at the end of the day, that their purpose is to help us all become our best selves.
Mm-hmm.
And some relationships won't do that. Friendships, romantic, otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. How does that feel? That's me sharing me. I know this is your story, but I wanted to just figure out
No,
from your perspective.
that's an important criteria, and I've heard other people describe it as is is being in this relationship potentially going to allow me to continue in the trajectory that I'm on to grow into the person that I want to be, that I believe that I was created to be. Um, yeah, that's an important
And them.
aspect. And you could say, oftentimes I consider like I could build a great romantic relationship with this person, but is the juice worth the squeeze? Is I can do this, but is this what I want to spend my attention on? So
Yeah,
it's an
sure.
important question that I ask myself.
Yeah, especially as a planner. I mean, a planner is going to do a cost benefit analysis,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But this is something we're actually all doing this. Maybe men a little bit more are ultimately asking themselves, is this going to be worth it? And that's not an unreasonable question to ask, because we have a finite lifespan in this, at least in this form.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if my average lifespan is 72 or 75 years, um, you know what? Yeah. Could I spend all of that, working on a relationship that required just a lot of patience and endurance and grit? I could. And every man has to figure that out, and every woman. And so the question is like, how many days do you go in a row of saying, am I becoming my best person? No, before you say, okay, it's time to move. And I don't know that that's a black and white. That's not a true false answer. That's,
Yeah,
everybody's got to figure that out.
I think something that we haven't touched on, and you could probably just do another episode on this entirely, is uh, part of my story includes like overcoming my addiction to female validation, female affirmation,
Yeah.
needing a female in my life to lean on, to sort of prop me up. make me feel like a man, however you want to describe it. Uh, yeah, I think I, I've I- I've ridded myself of that maladaptive behavior, and I don't. I want female companionship in my life, but I don't need it like I need oxygen and water and
Right.
shelter. For me, it's and who knows, this might play out over the next number of years. Like how much of female companionship do I want in my life? Um, because what I don't want is after reading recreating home for me is I don't want to do I don't necessarily want the same thing I had with a different woman in a different community. That seems pointless to me.
Yeah,
That doesn't feel like my path.
that's pretty good. Um, well, let me ask you a few final questions. The next one I was just wondering is what advice you would, what other advice you'd give either a younger version of yourself or another man listening who's in the spot, whichever you prefer. Um, if there was one thing you wanted him to know, what would it be?
Yeah, I would want him to know, especially in a situation where there's the divorce bomb. I would want him to know that there's time. That I would coach myself that there's time, that there's nothing urgent about this. It seems urgent. The mediator's saying this thing, my wife's saying this thing. Everyone's really upset, but none of this is urgent. Like there's plenty of time. And just relax, be patient, and start diving into a new approach that seems authentic and real for you. Like be in a place where you can listen to your heart and see where it's leading you.
Yeah,
I made a
that's
lot
awesome.
of mistakes by approaching things in an urgent manner.
Yeah, that goes along with it not being present, doesn't it?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think often we can start to gain traction in a certain direction in the way that we want to go, and we can also I think urgency is a great way to get distracted and take us off course. Hmm.
Yeah, I say to many men to be on the lookout for urgency. You can use it diagnostically, you might say, meaning if you're walking around with a great sense of urgency, it's a giveaway that you've got some work to do.
Mhm.
I mean, I kind of disgustingly say if it's not diarrhea or vomiting and it feels urgent, it's probably not.
Yeah.
um, if you feel that, you're feeling your worldview basically creating a state of anxiety and fear and insecurity, and it's so subtle. We become so normalized to it that we just think that's how life is. But
Hmm.
when we are when we have a restored sense of well-being, we don't live in a state of constant urgency.
Hmm. I can remember like short seasons when I recognized the urgency and when I recognized that that was a warning light on my dashboard
Mm-hmm.
of that would be a signal to me that this is a time to kind of go on a question fast, stop asking the people in my life questions, let go of a sense of desperation that I needed to have the answer right now. Because oftentimes, like sharing a current problem with someone else, like convolutes it and it muddies the water a little bit.
Yeah,
So I would journal about that, think about it, reflect on it, and I would just go through periods of being on a question fast, and with the objective being because I have like this innate urge to take action. So to overcome like that urge to constantly be taking action on stimulus around me, um, it's often better to just do nothing in that moment and let more information to come to light.
yeah,
Just take a couple days, do nothing, and see what happens.
you're basically describing how to teach yourself not to be reactive.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's so much here. I'm sure that people listening could be really confused by, or even upset by, because a question fast. What we mean by that is to learn to recognize urgency and not just urgency, but your desire to get other people to tell you that you're okay and what it takes for you to be okay. Because that there's no path forward when you live that way. Meaning, if you don't know how to answer the questions of what it takes for you to be okay, you're living in a disempowered state where other people tell you you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not emotionally safe. You can't have a relationship with somebody if they tell you that you're okay, because they become responsible for that well-being. So the idea of a question fast for our listener is to take 24 or 36 hours and don't ask other people questions. And this is not us saying you don't need anybody or to live as some lone wolf.
Mm-hmm.
It's an exercise to notice how desperately you are for other people to define your well-being.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank
And
you.
a lot of times we don't realize it until we go on this fast. It's really hard. Maybe a precursor, if this feels too uncomfortable, by the way, is to just start noticing how many of your words end in a question mark.
Mm-hmm.
That sometimes that's a little bit of a giveaway of like, wow, I'm living in a state of intense anxiety and uncertainty and insecurity. And none of those are shameable, by the way. We're not suggesting that there's a problem here, just that like that's not peace, that's not calm, that's not well-being. And there is a path to that, but you have to first notice that where you instinctively want to reach out to other people to tell you that you're okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Very
Thank you for
uncomfortable.
that context. And that's exactly how I meant a question fast.
Yeah, I know you did. That
It
was
was
just from
a
the
recognition that for me that I needed the group of people in my life. I needed them to answer all these questions so that I could feel better in that moment. And I
yeah.
recognized that as a warning sign for myself. And then to
And
just relax and to not do nothing helped me to relax and just keep living my
yeah,
life.
it's how you learn that despite the neurotic voice in your head that has all these questions, that you're actually okay.
Yeah.
That's a very Michael Singer approach, by the way.
Yeah, and how that ties back into the 4.5 years and that there's time is uh, for the large percentage of that time that wasn't my approach. So that was something that I needed to grow in for sure. Um,
Yeah, it's a big maturity shift right there that you just described.
it is, yeah. So I'd like to have a little bit of that back. I wish I could have gained some of that wisdom sooner, but it played out how it played out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, any final remarks before we wrap this up? Anything else you'd want anybody listening to know, or
Yeah, sure. I think that anyone that's listened this far and is interested in this topic, maybe divorce is on your mind. Maybe that's something that you've been thinking about. And I would just want to hearten that listener by saying that you can have a great life on the other side of divorce. You can rebuild your life, and it's it'll like unfold in ways that you didn't quite expect, and it can lead to a lot of unexpected joy.
that's a great way to end this. I appreciate you being on. Of course, I deeply value your brotherhood and friendship for all these years. And Lord willing, we'll have a lot more of those times to do this. I'm glad that we both have experienced the growth we've had in our life, because
Yeah.
it's just a way better context for friendship as well. So
Yeah. Yeah.
appreciate you, man.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be on, and thank you for being you. Thank you for being a great brother.
You're welcome. All right, I'll have you back about some other topics. I do want to talk more about the role of the female and how we think about our value and worth. That's a great conversation to have.
Okay.
So we'll see you when you come back.
Okay. Take care. Thank you.